Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. My friend and colleague and co-host Gordon Chang is traveling. He is on the line with me from Hong Kong. A very good morning to you, Gordon.
Good morning, John.
These last days, much discussion in the United States following a Saturday essay in the Wall Street Journal by an important China watcher at the Brookings Institution that Xi Jinping, the new boss in China, and the expressions of what appears to be a sentimental cult of personality, the appearance of medals and pledges of allegiance and songs to the dear leader in some fashion, is not only neo-Maoism, but is an expression of weakness, not strength, in the Chinese Communist Party. This is a theme that's very well known to you, Gordon. You've been developing these last 2 years. However, it appears that other China watchers are coming to this. Are you surprised now, Gordon, now in the spring of 2015, with Xi Jinping firmly in power, that there are doubts?
Yes, John. In a general sense, I'm surprised about now, this particular month, especially because you have the National People's Congress meeting, which is really intended to show the power of the party. But in general, I suppose the answer is no, because this had to happen at some particular time. And that's the reason, because I think right now we're seeing so many symptoms that are not consistent with the general narrative that we heard before about Xi Jinping's strength.
We welcome Arthur Waldron. Professor Arthur Waldron is the Lauder Professor of International Relations at the University of Pennsylvania. He is a China hand. Arthur, a very good evening to you. The provocative essay, The Turning Point, with gorgeous pictures of the red flags draping and Xi Jinping sitting in the middle of a parade of bureaucrats who are not smiling. These fellows are not ready for YouTube. But in any event, the essay was written by David Shambaugh, who is at the Brookings Institution, as well as a professor at George Washington University. And in this essay, you're very familiar with it, he expresses what he says are his doubts for the first time that Xi Jinping, that the Chinese leadership can survive the present pressures. Do you endorse that this spring is unusual, that something has turned, or is this a gradual affair that has been in place for many years and nothing new? Good evening to you, Arthur.
Good evening. Well, I would say that what's new is that the party is in disarray. The essay by Shambaugh is really nothing new. He could have lifted much of it from Gordon's book. What's the news is that someone who's been a pillar of Chinese despotism for nearly 40 years has finally figured out that it doesn't work. That's what the news is. Xi Jinping is behaving in many ways like a highly confident, old-fashioned emperor who wants to get something done. And remember, he has the option of just swanning around and doing nothing. So he's opted instead for a very high-risk game. Seems to me it's as follows. If he fails, he goes after tigers, that is to say, these rich and corrupt, deeply entrenched officials. And he's gotten a whole bunch of them, and there are rumors now of more. And I must say the Chinese have not been this interested in their politics since 1989. They're all buzzing about it. If he fails and the tigers all get loose, then you're going to have something like civil war and chaos in China. If he succeeds and he gets the tigers caged, he's going to have a much cleaner situation. And he has pledged moves in the direction of law, and so forth. Now, of course, he claims to believe in communism, and Gorbachev certainly believed in communism. But there was a very interesting little piece in the Global Times, this down-market tabloid the other day, condemning Shambaugh and other China watchers for seeing China as a polarity between oppression or chaos. And it had the following sentence: none of these Western China specialists have ever imagined that we Chinese, too, could have a peaceful democratic transition. And those words just jumped out at me, because what they suggest is that if Xi succeeds in establishing his power and defanging these tigers, then he has some rather well thought out ideas about moving first toward legality and due process, and then who knows, maybe further. But it must be said that he's on a knife edge. He's on a knife edge. So we're at a moment where it can fall either way. One way would be a catastrophe, civil war, God knows what. The other might be, in fact, I'm certain it is, whichever way it goes, the beginning of the exit of China from communism.
Gordon?
Yes, Arthur, it's very interesting that you have Xi Jinping right now who is trying to do, as you say, great things, but there is so much pessimism about his ability to do that. And it's pessimism not just among China's critics, as the Global Times points out, but it's also China's old friends, because Shambao was clearly one of the staunchest defenders of the regime just about 2 or 3 years ago, and his change in views is stunning. It seems to me that Chinese communism has never made sense. It's never been consistent what people know about the way the world operates.
Well, that's
but China has...
I mean, if we had written 40 years ago an essay saying China doesn't work, that communism doesn't work, it would have been correct. So
yes, and the thing that's important here is that now you have this loss of confidence, not only among the critics of China, but also among its friends. And we're starting to see local Chinese officials start to talk about the end of the Chinese state. And of course, all this is taking place with unprecedented capital flight from the country, as well as Chinese people leaving their country for good. And so really what we've got now is a crisis of confidence. So whatever Xi Jinping is trying to do, whether for good or ill, as you point out, it seems to me that this cannot work, largely because the Chinese people have now said they don't think it's going to function.
Well, I agree with you with the following proviso. I think that if, like Gorbachev, he thinks that communism can be made to work, then he's certainly going to fail. But there are indications from economic legislation and all the rest that he may... We just don't know. He may be smarter than that. I mean, remember, the Soviet Union managed to disappear without killing millions and millions of people. Now, if things go wrong for Xi, millions may well be killed. But if he succeeds in defanging the tigers and somehow establishing power, because he's very popular with ordinary Chinese, because they're glad that these guys are getting their
Professor, I puzzle here, though. Xi Jinping has no legitimacy. He's a princeling. He came to his wealth without effort. He has no faction in the Chinese population. He's a creature entirely of the party and perhaps the army, but no more than that. So to look to him as some Hegelian hero seems far-fetched. It seems like we're projecting European history onto a man who, after all, has inherited mass murder.
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, none of them has legitimacy. But if you read the Chinese internet, as I say, they're more interested in this than anything since before Tiananmen. There are lots of pieces which argue that he may be able, despite all of these failings, to navigate some kind of a relatively bloodless exit from communism. Remember that communism doesn't work.
Right.
We've got to get out.
But warlords, Arthur, warlords work, and he's got them on the right and the left, and he's got billionaires willing to finance militias.
No, I know that.
He's got Bo Xilai in jail, and he'd be happy to lead the Communist Party if Xi Jinping is tired.
That's why I say that if things break against him, we have a complete catastrophe. He's playing for the very, very highest stakes.
So he's drawing to an inside straight. I thank you for that, Arthur. Well, Gordon, I want you to enjoy this for a moment. It's not capital flight, it's China hand flight, isn't it, Gordon?
Well, absolutely, John. And this is really the important thing, and that is if you go back a year ago, you'd have most China watchers saying that the Chinese system is stable, it's institutionalized, got a lot of bureaucracy, it will be able to survive. But now you have voices, and they're now becoming almost a majority, not quite, but they're almost a majority that are saying, no, this just can't work. And that's really the problem, because this is an issue of confidence, because when that confidence disappears, then really there is nothing propping up this regime.
Arthur, his modesty overwhelms me. Please, let's pummel him with the fact that a year ago, the China hands were listening to Gordon on this air with you and me, and they were tisking us, and now they're joining.
Well, no, the amazing thing is, John, is that it's taken them only 40 years of full-time study of the People's Republic of China to determine that the system doesn't work. And now it's news that they have figured this out. Whereas lots of people, Gordon, you, me, and many, many more, have known since 1950 that the system didn't work and that the Soviet system before it didn't work. So it's one of these sort of man bites dog news stories.
Arthur Waldron, Lauder Professor of International Relations at the University of Pennsylvania. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com. He's traveling us in Hong Kong. And ladies and gentlemen, 2 + 2 does not equal 5. I'm John Batchelor.